The storm carved through Oregon like a blade. Ryan Webb's pickup truck crawled along Highway 99 West, windshield wipers fighting the relentless rain. In the back seat, 8-year-old Lucas slept peacefully, trusting his father to navigate them safely home. The headlights swept the empty road ahead, then captured something that shouldn't exist. A figure emerged from the darkness. A woman in a torn black cocktail dress, barefoot on the freezing asphalt. Silk clung to her shivering frame like wet skin. Blood traced a crimson line from her split lip down her chine. A diamond bracelet caught the light, sparkling incongruously against bruised flesh. She pressed a shattered phone to her ear, desperation etched in every trembling movement. "Do you need help?" Ryan called through the rain-soaked night. Her head snapped up, revealing eyes blue as winter ice and twice as frightened. "You're not one of Vincent's men, are you?" That single question shattered Ryan's quiet world forever. Ryan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Vincent. The name meant nothing to him, but the terror in her voice meant everything. Behind him, Lucas stirred, mumbling something about homework in his sleep. The woman took a step backward, muscles coiled like a trapped animal ready to bolt. Her dress clung to her legs, designer fabric reduced to expensive rags. "I don't know any Vincent," Ryan said softly, keeping his voice calm. "But you're hurt. Let me help you." The woman's eyes darted past his truck, scanning the empty highway for something that made her whole body flinch. Rain plastered her blonde hair to her skull, transforming her from elegant to desperate in the span of heartbeats. She clutched the broken phone tighter, knuckles white against the dark screen. "If I get in your truck," she whispered, "people might die." The words hung between them like a confession. Ryan could drive away. Should drive away. His son was in the back seat, trusting him to make safe choices. But something in her eyes reminded him of another woman who'd needed help 3 years ago. His wife, fighting cancer in a hospital bed, begging him not to let their son watch her fade away. "What's your name?" Ryan asked, rolling down his window completely despite the rain that immediately soaked his shirt. The woman hugged her arms around herself, shivering violently. Her lips had turned blue, but not just from cold. Fear painted her face in shades of exhaustion and desperation. "Natalie," she said after a long pause. Behind her, headlights appeared in the distance, still far away but approaching fast. The sight made her stumble forward, nearly falling. "Please," she whispered. "They found me." Ryan made his choice. He reached across and opened the passenger door, ignoring every rational thought, screaming at him to protect his son first. Natalie hesitated for exactly 2 seconds before diving into the cab, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume mixed with rain and something darker. Fear that had soaked so deep it had become part of her skin. She pulled the door shut and immediately slumped forward, pressing her face into her hands. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I'm so sorry. You don't understand what you've just done." Lucas woke as the truck lurched back into motion, his sleepy voice cutting through the tension like a child's voice always did, innocent and unaware. "Dad? Who's the lady?" Natalie turned in her seat, and for the first time since Ryan had seen her, something soft flickered across her features. Lucas rubbed his eyes, blinking at her with the curiosity only children possessed. "Hi," he said simply. "You're really wet." Despite everything, Natalie almost smiled. "Hi there. Yes, I am. I lost my umbrella." Ryan watched in his rear-view mirror as the distant headlights slowed, stopped, then suddenly accelerated in their direction. His foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, but the old pickup could only do so much. Natalie noticed his tension and followed his gaze to the mirror. Her entire body went rigid. "How fast can this thing go?" she asked quietly, not wanting to alarm Lucas. "Fast enough," Ryan lied. The speedometer needle climbed past 60, then 65. Behind them, the pursuing vehicle, a dark sedan that definitely wasn't local, closed the gap with predatory efficiency. "Why are they chasing you?" Ryan asked, taking a sharp right onto a smaller road that led deeper into the Oregon countryside. Natalie's hands shook as she tried to fasten her seatbelt. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the dashboard light again, and Ryan noticed something he'd missed before, an engraving on the metal clasp. Even from his angle he could make out two letters, V and N. "It's complicated," she said, which wasn't an answer at all. Lucas had gone quiet in the back seat, sensing the adult tension even if he didn't understand it. The sedan followed them onto the side road, headlights sweeping through the truck's rear window like searchlights. Ryan's mind raced through options. He knew these roads better than whoever was following them, but that advantage would only last so long. "There's a cabin about 5 miles ahead," he said. "Off the main road. If we can get there without them seeing exactly where we turn." Natalie nodded, her breathing rapid and shallow. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "Vincent doesn't accept losses." Ryan took another turn, this one onto a dirt road barely wide enough for his truck. The pursuing headlights overshot the turn, giving them precious seconds. He killed his own lights and drove by memory alone, trusting years of late-night fishing trips to guide him through the darkness. Beside him, Natalie had gone completely silent except for her ragged breathing. In the back seat, Lucas pressed his face to the window, watching the trees rush past like dark sentinels. "Are we playing hide-and-seek?" he asked innocently. The cabin appeared through the rain like a haven, small, isolated, and invisible from the main road. Ryan parked behind it, cutting the engine and listening to the silence that followed. No pursuing headlights, no sound of engines, just rain drumming on the roof and the three of them breathing in the dark. "We should be safe here for tonight," Ryan said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Natalie turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since getting in his truck. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," she said, but her voice carried gratitude underneath the warning. Lucas unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward between the seats. "Can we go inside? I'm cold." Ryan realized his son was right. They were all soaked and shivering. Whatever dangerous game they'd stumbled into could wait until they were warm and dry. He reached under his seat and pulled out a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a promise of safety they all desperately needed. Inside the cabin, Ryan lit the wood stove while Natalie stood dripping by the door, looking like she expected it to burst open at any moment. The space was small but warm, a single room with a kitchenette, a worn couch, and a loft where Lucas could sleep. Fishing gear hung on the walls, and the smell of old coffee lingered in the air. This was Ryan's refuge, the place he came to think about his wife and remember better times. Now it sheltered a stranger running from something that made grown men with expensive cars chase women through storms. Lucas explored the cabin with the resilience children possessed, finding an old deck of cards and spreading them on the floor like they were treasure. Natalie watched him with an expression Ryan couldn't quite read, longing mixed with something deeper and sadder. "How old is he?" she asked quietly. 8, Ryan replied, toweling off his son's hair. "Same age as—" She stopped herself, but not before Ryan caught the pain that flashed across her face. Whatever her story was, children were part of it. "I should call the police," Ryan said, testing her reaction. Natalie's response was immediate and visceral. She stepped backward, shaking her head frantically. "No, please, you can't." Her hand moved unconsciously to the diamond bracelet, twisting it around her wrist like a nervous habit. "They won't believe me. Vincent has people everywhere." The fear in her voice was real, but so was something else. Shame, as if whatever had happened to her was somehow her fault. Ryan studied her face in the firelight, noting details he'd missed in the chaos of the chase. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that came with a price tag. Professional makeup that had run but not completely washed away. A haircut that cost more than Ryan made in a week. Clothes that, even torn and muddy, were obviously expensive. This wasn't a woman who belonged on a rural highway in the middle of nowhere. "Who is Vincent?" he asked gently. Natalie's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Vincent Blackwood. Maybe you've heard of him. Tech billionaire, philanthropist, darling of Portland society." She touched her split lip gingerly. He doesn't like it when his property tries to leave. The way she said property made Ryan's stomach turn. Lucas looked up from his cards, sensing the adult conversation had turned serious. "Why did the bad man hurt you?" he asked, with the direct honesty only children possessed. Natalie knelt down to Lucas's level, and for a moment her mask slipped completely. "Because I was trying to help someone he hurt," she said simply. "Sometimes adults do bad things, and other adults have to try to stop them." Lucas nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. "Like superheroes," he said. "But you don't have a cape." Despite everything, Natalie smiled. A real smile this time. "No cape. Just a really torn dress." Ryan made coffee while Natalie helped Lucas build a house out of playing cards, her hands steady despite everything she'd been through. Watching them together, he felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. It had been 3 years since Lucas had interacted with a woman who wasn't a teacher or a neighbor making awkward small talk. 3 years since their small family had felt complete. "I'm a doctor," Natalie said suddenly, as if she'd been debating whether to tell them. "Child psychology, or I was before Vincent destroyed my practice." She helped Lucas place another card on their increasingly ambitious structure. "He has ways of making people disappear from their own lives. Lawsuits, false accusations, pressure on colleagues." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Ryan heard the devastation underneath. "I specialized in trauma cases, children who'd been hurt." The pieces clicked together in Ryan's mind with sickening clarity. A child psychologist who'd been beaten and was running from a powerful man. A woman who looked at Lucas with professional assessment and personal longing. Whatever Vincent Blackwood had done, it involved children, and Natalie had tried to stop him. "That's why you can't go to the police," Ryan said. It wasn't a question. Natalie nodded, carefully placing the final card on Lucas's house. "The first time I tried to report him, I was the one who ended up under investigation. Suddenly I was the unstable doctor making false accusations against a respected businessman." She sat back on her heels, watching Lucas admire their creation. "The second time, I lost my license temporarily. The third time, I lost everything. My practice, my reputation, my freedom to work with children. But you kept trying," Ryan observed. Something in his voice made Natalie look up at him sharply. "You kept fighting for those kids." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he saw the strength underneath her fear. Not the kind that came from never being hurt, but the kind that came from being broken and choosing to heal anyway. "Someone has to," she said simply. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but the darkness remained absolute. Ryan checked the windows, seeing nothing but their own reflection in the glass. No headlights, no movement. Maybe they'd lost their pursuers. Maybe Vincent's men had given up for the night. Maybe they were safe. But the tension in Natalie's shoulders told him she didn't believe in maybe. Lucas had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted by the excitement and soothed by the warmth of the fire. Natalie covered him with a fishing blanket, her movements gentle and practiced. "You're good with him," Ryan said quietly. "Do you have children?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in the chair across from him, staring into the flames. "I did," she whispered. "A long time ago." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things that couldn't be said. Ryan understood loss. He'd buried his wife and raised his son alone, learning that grief was just love with nowhere to go. But the way Natalie held herself suggested something different, something that left deeper scars than death. "Vincent?" he asked gently. She nodded without looking at him. "His stepson, 8 years old, the same age as Lucas. I was treating him for severe trauma," Natalie continued, her voice hollow. "Nightmares, behavioral issues, signs of physical abuse. When I started asking the right questions, getting close to the truth, Vincent moved fast. Suddenly I was the problem. The unstable doctor who'd formed an inappropriate attachment to her patient." Her hands clenched in her lap. "They took the boy away from me, said I was projecting my own psychological issues onto him." Ryan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Where is he now?" Natalie's laugh was broken glass. "Dead? Fell down the stairs at Vincent's penthouse 6 months after I was removed from his case. Tragic accident, they said. 8-year-old boy, clumsy in expensive shoes." She finally looked at Ryan, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I knew what Vincent was capable of. I'd seen the evidence, and I couldn't save him." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Lucas stirred in his sleep, and both adults watched him with the protective intensity of parents who understood how quickly innocence could be stolen. "That's why you kept fighting," Ryan said, "even after everything he did to you." Natalie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing what remained of her makeup. "I couldn't save Thomas. But maybe I could save the next one." A sound outside made them both freeze, the distant rumble of an engine growing closer. Natalie was on her feet instantly, moving to the window like a woman who'd spent months learning to recognize danger. "They found us," she breathed. Ryan joined her at the window, his hand instinctively moving to Lucas's sleeping form. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see headlights approaching slowly, methodically, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "How many?" Ryan asked, his mind already calculating options. The cabin had a back door, but it led into dense forest that would be nearly impossible to navigate in the dark with a child. Natalie counted silently, her breath fogging the glass. 2 cars, maybe 6 men. She turned to him, her face pale but determined. "This is my fault. I'll go with them. Maybe they'll leave you and Lucas alone." "Like hell," Ryan said quietly, but with conviction that surprised them both. He moved to a cabinet near the door and pulled out a hunting rifle, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. Natalie stared at him. "You don't understand," she said urgently. "These aren't ordinary criminals. Vincent has resources, connections. He can make people disappear." Ryan woke Lucas gently, keeping his voice calm despite the approaching danger. "Hey, buddy, we need to play a game. A hiding game." Lucas sat up, instantly alert the way children could be when they sensed their parents' fear. "Are the bad men here?" he asked quietly. Ryan nodded, impressed by his son's quick understanding. "We're going to go out the back door and hide in the woods until they leave." But as they gathered their things, the front door exploded inward. 3 men in expensive suits filled the doorway, their presence transforming the warm cabin into something cold and threatening. The leader, a tall man with silver hair and dead eyes, smiled when he saw Natalie. "Dr. Cross," he said pleasantly. "Mr. Blackwood has been worried sick about you." Natalie stepped protectively in front of Lucas, her fear transforming into something fiercer. "Tell Vincent I'm not coming back, Patterson." The man, Patterson, tilted his head as if considering her words. "I'm afraid that's not an option. You have something that belongs to him." His gaze moved to the diamond bracelet on her wrist, then to Ryan and Lucas. "And now you've involved innocent people." Ryan raised the rifle, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Get out of my cabin." Patterson's smile widened. "Mr. Webb, isn't it? Single father, works at Hammond Lumber, late on rent?" The casual recitation of personal information was more threatening than any direct threat. "You have a choice. Give us Dr. Cross, and you and your son can continue your quiet little life. Refuse, and things become complicated." "Dad," Lucas whispered, pressing against Ryan's leg. The boy was trying to be brave, but his small body trembled with fear. Natalie looked down at him, then at Ryan, and he saw her making a decision that would sacrifice herself to save them. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll go." But as she stepped toward Patterson, Lucas did something unexpected. He grabbed her hand and held on tight. "No," Lucas said, with the simple conviction only children possessed. "You're part of our family now." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Patterson's expression darkened, but before he could respond, sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. His head snapped toward the sound, confusion replacing confidence. "You called the police?" he demanded. Ryan was as surprised as Patterson, but he didn't let it show. The sirens grew louder, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. "Someone must have heard the commotion," he said calmly, though his mind raced. Who could have called the authorities? They were miles from the nearest neighbor. Patterson barked orders to his men, their coordinated retreat suggesting this wasn't their first time dealing with unwanted law enforcement attention. As the men disappeared into the night as quickly as they'd arrived, Ryan realized Natalie was staring at her broken phone with a strange expression. "What is it?" he asked. She held up the device, and he could see that despite the spider-webbed screen, a small indicator light was blinking steadily. "GPS tracker," she said quietly. "Vincent always insisted I carry it for safety. I thought it was broken in the accident." "Accident?" Ryan asked, but the approaching sirens cut off her response. The first police car pulled up to the cabin, followed by two more. Sheriff Reynolds stepped out of the lead vehicle, his weathered face serious but not surprised. "Ryan!" he called out. "Got a report of gunshots and vehicles speeding through private property. Everyone okay?" Ryan looked at Natalie, who was staring at the sheriff with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Sheriff Reynolds," she said slowly. "You came." The sheriff's expression softened when he saw her condition. The torn dress, the bruises, the fear that clung to her like a second skin. "Dr. Cross, we've been looking for you since your colleague reported you missing from Portland." He gestured to his deputies. "Let's get you checked out by the paramedics." As medical personnel tended to Natalie's injuries, she pulled Ryan aside. "The phone," she said urgently. "Vincent's been tracking me the whole time. That's how they found us so quickly." She pressed the device into his hands. "But it also means the GPS was recording everywhere I've been for the last week, including Vincent's private estate." Ryan understood immediately. "Evidence." Natalie nodded. "The estate where he took me after the accident, where he kept me locked up until I escaped tonight." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Where he told me exactly what he did to Thomas, and what he planned to do to other children." She gripped his arm. "The phone recorded everything, Ryan. Every confession, every threat, every detail about his operation." Sheriff Reynolds approached them, his expression grim. "Dr. Cross, I need to ask you about the events of the past week. We've had investigators from the FBI asking questions about Vincent Blackwood." Natalie's eyes widened. "FBI?" The sheriff nodded. "Turns out you weren't the only one trying to bring him down. Federal investigators have been building a case for months, but they needed someone with inside knowledge. The GPS data, Ryan said, understanding beginning to dawn. You weren't just running tonight. You were bringing evidence to the authorities. Natalie's smile was shaky, but genuine. Dr. Sarah Chen, my former colleague, has been working with federal investigators. When Vincent took me, she knew it was our chance to get solid evidence. She looked down at Lucas, who had fallen asleep again despite the chaos around them. I just never expected to involve a family in the process. The next morning brought clarity and consequences in equal measure. Vincent Blackwood's empire began crumbling as federal agents executed search warrants based on the GPS evidence and Natalie's recorded confessions. The man who had seemed untouchable just 24 hours earlier was now facing charges that would ensure he never hurt another child. Ryan watched from his kitchen window as news vans departed and the last police cars disappeared down the dirt road. The cabin felt too quiet after everything that had happened. Lucas sat at the table, building another house of cards while humming tunelessly to himself. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze Ryan. His son had processed their terrifying night as just another adventure, already incorporating it into his expanding understanding of how the world worked. "Where will you go now?" Ryan asked when Natalie emerged from the guest room, looking more like herself in borrowed clothes and with her injuries properly treated. She'd spent the morning on the phone with FBI agents, lawyers, and the medical board that would reinstate her license now that Vincent's manipulation was exposed. Her life was waiting to be rebuilt from the ashes of everything she'd lost. "Portland, eventually," she said, accepting the coffee he offered. "The federal prosecutor wants me to testify at Vincent's trial, and there are other victims, children who need advocates, adults who need to know they're not alone." She sat across from him at the small table, watching Lucas construct an elaborate card palace. "But first, I need to remember how to be a person again instead of a victim." Lucas looked up from his cards with the serious expression he wore when solving complex problems. "You could stay here," he announced matter-of-factly. "We have room. And Dad makes really good pancakes on Sundays." Ryan felt his heart skip as Natalie's eyes met his across the table. The idea was impossible. She was a doctor with a career to rebuild. He was a lumber worker in a town where nothing important ever happened. But Lucas's simple logic cut through all the reasonable objections. "I don't know anything about small towns," Natalie said gently, but Ryan caught the longing in her voice. "I've lived in cities my whole adult life." Lucas considered this seriously. "We could teach you," he offered. "Dad taught me how to fish and fix cars and make coffee. He could teach you too." The innocence of the suggestion made both adults smile, but underneath the humor was a real possibility neither of them had expected. "The thing about small towns," Ryan said carefully, "is that they're good places to heal. People here don't ask too many questions about your past. They judge you by what you do now, not what happened to you before." He refilled her coffee cup, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "And Lucas is right about the pancakes." Over the following weeks, as news of Vincent Blackwood's arrest dominated headlines and Natalie's story became a symbol of courage in the face of powerful corruption, she found herself returning to the cabin more and more often. What started as weekend visits to decompress from legal proceedings became longer stays that felt less like escaping and more like coming home. Lucas thrived having her around. She helped with homework using techniques that made learning feel like play, listened to his endless questions about everything from fish behavior to why adults sometimes hurt children, and gradually began filling the maternal space that had been empty in his life for 3 years. Ryan watched their growing bond with a mixture of joy and terror. Joy because his son was healing from losses Ryan hadn't even realized he carried. Terror because happiness felt too fragile to trust. The town of Cedarville welcomed Natalie with the cautious kindness rural communities extended to outsiders who proved themselves worthy. She started volunteering at the local elementary school, offering informal counseling to children dealing with trauma or family disruption. Word spread quietly that the lady staying at Ryan Webb's cabin knew how to help kids talk about things that scared them. One evening in late spring, as Ryan watched Natalie and Lucas plant flowers in the small garden behind the cabin, Sheriff Reynolds stopped by with news. "Vincent Blackwood pled guilty to all charges," he announced. 25 to life. No possibility of parole. Natalie's hands stilled in the soil, her shoulders sagging with relief she'd been holding back for months. "It's over," she whispered. But endings, Ryan had learned, were just beginnings in disguise. That night, as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching Lucas chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Natalie made an announcement that surprised no one and changed everything. "I've been offered a position at the county mental health clinic," she said quietly. "Part-time, specializing in child trauma cases." Lucas stopped chasing fireflies and ran to them, grass stains on his knees and joy on his face. "Does that mean you're staying?" he asked with the directness that still caught adults off guard. Natalie looked at Ryan, who was studying his hands as if they held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. "Would you like me to stay?" she asked both father and son. "Yes," Lucas said immediately, then with more thought. "But only if you want to. Dad says people should only stay somewhere if it makes them happy." Ryan finally looked up, meeting Natalie's gaze. "What makes you happy?" he asked quietly. She was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sound of crickets and the distant call of an owl, breathing in the scent of the flowers they'd planted together. "This," she said simply. "This makes me happy." She gestured to the cabin, the garden, Lucas's muddy shoes by the door, Ryan's fishing gear hanging on the porch rail. "For the first time in years, I wake up looking forward to the day instead of dreading it." Her voice grew stronger. "I lost everything once, but maybe that was so I could find what I was really supposed to have." Ryan reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, noting how the simple gold band he'd made for her looked right next to the tan line where Vincent's diamond bracelet used to rest. "We're not much," he said honestly. "Just a single dad and his son in a cabin that needs a new roof." Natalie squeezed his fingers. "You're everything," she said. "Your safety and kindness and the kind of love that doesn't keep score." Lucas had gone back to chasing fireflies, but his laughter carried a note of pure contentment that hadn't been there before Natalie arrived. 3 months ago, Ryan's world had consisted of work, worry, and the careful protection of what little happiness he'd managed to preserve. Now it included morning coffee shared with someone who understood both healing and hope, afternoon homework sessions that somehow turned into impromptu science experiments, and evenings filled with the comfortable rhythm of a family that had chosen each other. As summer settled over Cedarville like a gentle blessing, the three of them established routines that felt as natural as breathing. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, where Natalie charmed vendors into sharing recipes, and Lucas collected smooth stones that caught his fancy. Sunday afternoons fishing at the lake, where comfortable silences were broken only by Lucas's observations about cloud shapes and Natalie's quiet amazement that such peace was possible. The town gradually stopped thinking of Natalie as the mysterious woman who'd brought danger to their doorstep and started seeing her as Dr. Cross, who helped the Morrison boy overcome his fear of speaking up when other kids bullied him, and who taught Sarah Jenkins that the nightmares about her parents' divorce weren't her fault. She was becoming part of the community's fabric, as essential as the librarian or the fire chief. One evening, As they prepared dinner together in the cabin's small kitchen, Lucas made an announcement that stopped both adults in their tracks. "I think Mom would have liked you," he told Natalie seriously. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother without prompting, the first time he'd referred to her in present tense as if she was still part of their family constellation. Natalie knelt down to Lucas's eye level, her hands gentle on his shoulders. "Tell me about her," she said softly. As Lucas shared memories of a mother who made the best chocolate chip cookies and always sang off-key in the car, Ryan felt something settle into place in his chest. Not the replacement of old love with new, but the expansion of his heart to hold both the past that had shaped them and the future they were building together. That night, after Lucas had fallen asleep, surrounded by his collection of lake stones and library books, Ryan and Natalie sat on the porch swing he'd built the week before. The Oregon sky stretched above them, vast and starred, full of possibilities neither of them had dared imagine 6 months earlier. "No regrets?" Ryan asked quietly. Natalie was quiet for a moment, thinking of the life she'd lost and the life she'd found. "I regret that it took so much pain to get here," she said finally. "I regret that Thomas didn't live to see Vincent face justice. I regret all the time I wasted thinking I had to carry everything alone." She leaned against Ryan's shoulder, solid and warm in the cooling night air. "But I don't regret the choices that brought me to you and Lucas." A year later, when journalists asked her to reflect on her journey from victim to advocate to survivor, Natalie would tell them that healing wasn't about forgetting trauma or pretending pain didn't exist. It was about learning that broken things could be beautiful when they were put back together with love. It was about understanding that sometimes the worst thing that happened to you led directly to the best thing that ever would. But on this night, in the quiet contentment of a family that had found each other through circumstances none of them would have chosen, she simply closed her eyes and listened to the sound of Ryan's breathing, the distant call of night birds, and the absolute silence that meant safety. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, patients to help, a community to serve, a relationship to nurture, a child to raise. Tonight, there was just this, the perfect ordinary miracle of being exactly where she belonged. As they finally headed inside, Natalie paused at the door to look back at the road that had brought her here, the highway where a single father had stopped for a stranger in a storm and changed the trajectory of 3 lives forever. Sometimes the most important journeys began with the simplest decision to help someone who needed it. Sometimes salvation came not from grand gestures or heroic acts, but from the quiet courage of ordinary people choosing kindness over convenience, love over fear. The cabin welcomed them back into its warmth, and as they checked on Lucas one last time before bed, both adults understood that they were no longer the broken people who had found each other in the rain. They were a family, imperfect and healing and real, built not on the fairy tale of effortless love, but on the more powerful foundation of choosing each other every day. And in the morning, they would wake up and choose each other again.